class, you have children of the loved wife, which eventually is Joseph. Children of the unloved wife, and so they're at a lower status. And then we have children of the servants, which are a distinct class as well. The sons in this family are ranked, and it's obvious to everybody who is loved and who is not. It's a pressure cooker waiting to explode. And it happens in the 37th chapter of the book of Genesis. In those first verses, especially 2 through 5, where we find Joseph going out into the world. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Belial and the sons of Zilpah. These are the third-class sons. And these are the sons of the slaves. And they're out with the animals, way out in the boonies, far from civilization, thatching it as best they could. They got the dirty job. Do you understand? Almost exile. And it says, he went out to see them taking care of the flock, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And when he made an ornate robe for him, and when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him. They could not speak a kind word to him. And then it says, the very next verse, and Joseph had a dream. Isn't that interesting? We see the trouble, and then the promise of God. God is moving in his life. The truth about life is that in this world we have trouble, right? It's always something. Now, Joseph was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He is the son, the only son at the time, of the much-loved Rachel. He is the apple of his father's eye. His father is wealthy. He's moving this kid forward, and he is going to be the prince of the family. And it's obvious in how Jacob's treating him that this boy is going to be in charge. It's not going to go to the oldest children. It's not going to go to those who do the most. It's going to, the majority of the family power is going to this boy because he's the one that Jacob loves. There is great unrest in the tents of Jacob and conflict. Wealth has a way of working on the human heart, doesn't it though? We think of lack, of need being such a driving force. There's something about having plenty laying around that it's difficult to deal with. The truth is that there are a lot of people who can deal with hard times. But there are a very few number of people who can have wealth and remain human. I know some. But it's tough. It's a hard business. It's a difficulty. They have this conflict. And so Joseph is sent out to check on the brothers to make sure that they're doing things right, that they're taking care of the interests of the family. And Joseph goes, and he finds the shepherds, the sons of the slave women, and he brings his father a bad report. It doesn't say that he tells lies about them. He makes them look bad. I'm sure that what he says is true, that they're wasting, that they're not doing well with the animals. They're not producing what they should. And he brings that back to his father. And it sets him at odds. He sets him in a dangerous place. Because there's conflict already, because they're angry at him. And it's not just these brothers, but the brothers of his Aunt Leah as well. That they're all in conflict because Joseph is set apart. That bad report. It's a difficult thing for one child to be put over the others. We had a teacher when I was in junior high that when she needed to leave the room, this is before the days of intercoms and things, back in the Stone Age of school. And if the teacher had to leave the room, she would leave one of the kids, give them a piece of chalk and stand at the board and say, if somebody talks, write their name on the board. That is an awful thing to do. That's horrible. That's almost evil because it puts the kid in an impossible situation. They have to mind the teacher and do their job. If the teacher comes back and finds everything out of control, who's going to be held responsible? And if that kid holds kids responsible and writes their name down, calls them out, and sets them up for punishment, who's the bad guy all of a sudden? That kid. Only they're in the shooting gallery. It's as if he stepped off the deep end. Not only is he the favorite, only is he the one that's going to inherit. Now he's become their judge and jury and executioner, and their conflict is there. See, these are hurting and angry guys. And it's not just their lives, because the pain goes clear back to Abraham, who broke faith with his own wife, and there was distrust there. And with Isaac, there were difficulties in his life as well, and especially as those two boys were growing up, Esau and Jacob, and the anger that went back and forth, and the way they mistreated each other, and the danger that was there. And then when Jacob returns, now he's living and he's raising his family, and the conflicts among them, well, the only unifying factor is that they hated somebody else. It's a poison. And in the middle of this, in the middle of all this, Joseph had a dream. Joseph had the dream. You'll remember that he saw a vision of bundles bowing down to one, and that he was going to be the leader of this family. It was going to be the blessing of God, and not only were his brothers going to bow down, but mother and father as well. And he saw this vision of this wonderful thing that God was going to do, a powerful thing, an overcoming thing. But it's the final, as you might say, straw with the brothers. And they decided to do something about it. He dreamed of authority and power, and being above all those who were older and because of their status better than him. He was going to be in control. And so what happened, as we know, he went out to check on the brothers one too many times. They were going to kill him, but instead they threw him in a cistern. And that wasn't good enough. They sold him to their cousins, the Ishmaelites, who carried him off to Egypt, right? Sold him as a slave to one of Pharaoh's officials, the chief of the secret police. That's who it was. The man who did away with all of Pharaoh's enemies, who kept discipline in the country. That's who he was sold to. And was put in this house to serve as a bottom-rung slave. But because God was working in him, he rose to the top and became the administrator. Only to find that the Potiphar's wife had an eye for a young guy. And because he refused her advances, what many would say was the law of lust, he was cast into jail. He's thrown into jail, accused falsely of approaching his master's wife. You have to say that these events held no promise. How low can you go? What's Joseph supposed to do with his dream now? He serves, doesn't he? And while he's there, he talks to two of Pharaoh's officials who are in jail because Pharaoh's angry with them. He interprets their dream. One to go to his death, the other to be raised back to his position. Do you remember the final thing in the story that he told this official? He said, when you get back to Pharaoh, remember that I told you this, get me out of here, huh? You ever done that sort of thing? You're depending on somebody to come through for you, and they totally forget about you. It's funny how people really are focused on you when they need you, and when they're past their need, they just don't focus at all. How many of you have ever talked to somebody who's in jail? Ever sit down and talk to somebody? Their world gets very, 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 very small. Very limited number of things happen. They're not going anywhere, they're not doing anything, the routine is set. They do everything that they're told because that's all they get to do. And so, when somebody communicates with them and says, I'm going to do this for you, they begin counting the seconds. These little things, to us that are little things, become huge to them because their options are so narrow. And so here's Joseph, and for 2 years he waits for this guy, the cupbearer of Pharaoh, to remember him. He waits, and he waits, and he waits, and he waits. There's so much pain and so much sorrow. Now we know that it all works out. We've heard the story how many times. That finally, Pharaoh has the dream, they need an interpreter, and the cupbearer goes, there's this guy. I love the phrase that he uses. He says to Pharaoh, the cupbearer does, he says, I am reminded of my faults, of my failings. There's a man in prison who can answer your question. And so out Joseph comes. entire country of Egypt, he also comes face to face with his brothers, because it's like this. There came a famine, there was hunger in the land, and even the people in Canaan were hungry, and that included his family. And so his brothers came down to Egypt. What a confrontation, can you imagine? Because we're talking about generations of hurt, and anger, and frustration. We're talking about old grudges that are compounded, and now these scoundrels who sold him, they hoped, to Joseph's death, are coming begging at the door of Egypt, and they have to answer to Joseph. But surprise of all surprises, he doesn't kill them. He doesn't imprison them. He doesn't abuse them. He gives them a hard time. He makes them face what they did. But he doesn't take revenge on them. He doesn't take revenge on them. And they are given a place to live. All their needs are provided for. They're given special status among the Egyptians to live in the very best of the land for their animals, and to grow and to multiply and become strong in a protected place. Amazing turn of events. And then all the family is now in Egypt, and Jacob dies, right? There in Egypt. And the brothers say to themselves, he's been nice to us all these years because of Dad. But now that Dad's gone, this is the end. And so they come and they bow down and they say, don't hurt us, don't be angry with us. He says, chapter 50, 18 through 21. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? Mark that phrase down. Underline that phrase right there. If you got it, underline that phrase. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I'll provide for you and your children. And he assured them and spoke kindly to them. This is the key to the whole story right here. There are two things that Joseph is telling his brothers. First of all, that God is in charge. It's a word called sovereignty. We don't use it often. A sovereign would be the one who is in control. Kings are often called that when they have true power. He's saying, am I in God's place? Am I the one in charge? No, I think not. It is God's in charge that is in charge. And God has providently given you this opportunity. That word providence is the action of doing good and blessing. There are three key concepts in this idea of sovereignty that we miss. We never talk about this theological term in our branch of